So think about something you were just absolutely obsessed with a decade ago. I mean, maybe a band or a 10-year life plan or even just a really specific aesthetic you swore you'd never, like, abandon.
Oh, yeah.
And now it means absolutely nothing to you. Or, think about a core belief you defended passionately at dinner parties that you now completely doubt.
Right. Looking back at those choices, those absolute certainties, it often triggers this sort of mild existential vertigo.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
sit there thinking, I would never, ever make that decision today. I don't even recognize the thought process that led to it.
But the funny thing is, when we look back at these drastic shifts, these choices we'd never make today that once felt totally natural, we almost never use the language of replacement.
What do you mean?
Like, we don't say, I became a totally different person. We just say, I changed.
That phrase, I changed, is actually holding a really profound paradox, if you think about it. I mean, it implies a fundamental difference, yet it relies on a continuous sameness. You are declaring that the person who made that foreign choice and the person who is currently rejecting that choice are somehow the exact same entity.
And unpacking that paradox is our mission today for this deep dive.
Yes, it is.
We are looking at identity through the lens of reflective humanism, which is a framework that treats human identity not as this static object you build and defend, but as a living trajectory adjusting to reality.
Right, it's very dynamic.
We want to figure out how we manage to remain ourselves despite having these completely contradictory pasts.
Because we usually operate under the assumption that personal identity is sustained by keeping the exact same beliefs, values, and judgments over time.
Right, the solid foundation idea.
Exactly. But what if identity is actually sustained by remaining connected to the different selves we have been? What if the goal isn't to be a solid block of granite, but, a continuous thread?
Well, to get into that, we really have to draw a hard line here between two concepts that get conflated all the time, which are consistency and continuity.
Yes, very important distinction.
Normally, we're taught to define the self through consistency.
Right, because consistency means maintaining the exact same state over time. You held a specific political view yesterday, you hold it today, and you will hold it tomorrow.
Right.
Your state remains unbroken. Continuity, however, means remaining connected even when the state fundamentally changes. Reflective humanism views the creation of the self as a generation, like a trajectory over time.
Let's ground this for anyone listening. Imagine someone who prioritized their career above absolutely everything else for 15 years.
The classic workaholic.
Yeah, exactly. They missed birthdays, they worked weekends, totally ignored their health, and truly believed this was the only path to a meaningful life.
Right.
Then, due to, say, severe biological burnout or maybe the birth of a child, their entire worldview shatters. Suddenly, their daily life, quiet mornings, family presence, that becomes the absolute priority.
A total paradigm shift.
Exactly. Their current values are 100% inconsistent with their past.
And by a strict standard of consistency, that person is either fundamentally broken or they were living a lie for those first 15 years.
Wow. Yeah.
But if we look at the actual path of biological exhaustion they hit, the new emotional data introduced by a child, the realization of what was becoming unsustainable, well, then the trajectory makes perfect sense.
Because they absorbed new realities.
Exactly. This is a transformation, not a replacement.
But society doesn't usually reward that kind of transformation, does it? I mean, we heavily reward consistency.
Oh, absolutely.
If someone completely flips their core values, we tend to view them with suspicion. Like, people who are strictly consistent appear much more trustworthy because they're predictable. If I know exactly what you're going to do and believe, I feel safe investing trust in you.
Social trust is inherently conservative in that way. It relies on a predictable state because it lowers the cognitive load, right? You don't have to constantly reevaluate who someone is.
Right, it's just easier.
It is economically and socially easier to categorize people into fixed identities. But human life, biologically and cognitively, requires adaptation.
Because things change.
We interact with an incredibly dynamic world. Trying to force a single unchanging narrative onto ourselves just to appear socially trustworthy, well, it forces us to lie about our own history.
Yeah.
We end up performing a static identity rather than living a real one.
Okay, so if consistency isn't the ultimate metric for a healthy identity, we have to figure out how to make sense of our glaring contradictions. Because we all have massive reversals in life.
Oh, definitely.
Leaving a hometown because you feel suffocated, only to return a decade later because you crave roots. or, needing a highly independent relationship, then completely discarding that need for something deeply intertwined.
And a lot of this gets framed as indecision, right?
Yeah. Couldn't a lot of this just be viewed as indecision or like a failure to figure out who you really are?
Well, contradictions are often pathologized as a lack of character or a sign of mental instability. But these reversals emerge because the environment changed. The information available to your nervous system changed.
Your resources, your relationships.
Exactly. Your access to resources and the nature of your relationships shifted. So the contradiction isn't just random flailing.
It's a biological and cognitive update.
Yes. These contradictions are the traces of the self colliding with reality. Reality leaves a mark. When you alter your stance on something, it is evidence that your internal model of the world has come into contact with friction and adjusted itself.
That makes a lot of sense.
To eliminate all contradiction is basically to eliminate evidence of learning.
Wow. Which I guess leads to this idea in the source material of the multi-phase self.
Yep.
The concept that several versions of yourself actually coexist in your present moment. You aren't just one synchronized block of updated code.
Right. Human cognition does not update uniformly.
So different parts of the self do not update at the same speed. It's like downloading a massive software update on your phone.
Okay, I like that analogy.
The core operating system has rebooted and is running the new version.
Right.
Right. But you have these background apps temporarily running on the old architecture, draining the battery and causing glitches.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. You might intellectually understand a new concept, say, you realize a specific coping mechanism you developed in childhood is now actively destroying your adult relationships.
Right. Your prefrontal cortex has the new update.
Exactly, the logic is there. But emotionally, biologically, your nervous system hasn't caught up. Your nervous system is still running the old app.
Because it takes time.
The physical reflex to withdraw or to lash out still fires because neural pathways take time to rewire. Personal stability does not require perfect, instantaneous synchronization across all parts of your mind.
That's a relief to hear, honestly.
A viable self holds these fluctuating, sometimes contradictory phases at once. It gradually rearranges them without collapsing. The goal is maintaining the ability to transition between phases rather than freezing yourself in a panic because part of you is lagging behind.
But let's look at the dark side of this, because living with those past phases can be deeply unpleasant.
Oh, absolutely.
What if I genuinely despise who I used to be? I look back at my early 20s and think, man, I was incredibly selfish, arrogant, and I made choices that really hurt people. The immediate instinct is to amputate that past self.
To just cut it off.
Right, to declare that wasn't the real me.
Yeah.
I am the person I am today.
The impulse to amputate is a natural self-preservation tactic, but it creates a dangerous distortion. Judging our past self solely by our present standards erases the actual conditions of that time. But wait, isn't that just a convenient way of dodging accountability? I mean, if I hurt someone in the past, I can't just brush it off as a past phase operating on bad data. I am still the person who caused the harm.
Yes, and this is a crucial distinction. Observing the past self is not justifying it. Recognizing that a past version of you is operating with limited information, intense fear, or, fewer visible options does not mean that version of you was correct.
Yeah. If you hurt someone, the moral weight of that action remains. Continuity means keeping that past self in your history of responsibility without cutting the cord.
So how do you hold both? Like, how do you accept the continuity without excusing the behavior?
By refusing to write a fictional, sanitized history. If you erase the past to create a neat, consistent story telling yourself that you were always basically a good person and that one era was just an anomaly, your identity becomes thin and brittle.
Interesting.
And more importantly, the influence of that suppressed past remains in your system. In reflective humanism, this phenomenon is called transparent pain.
Transparent pain. So the friction is still there, but you can't see what's causing it.
Exactly. When a past version of you develops a behavioral trace, like a hypervigilance, a tendency to keep people at arm's length, a specific anxiety that trace is wired into you.
Right, it's physical.
And if you erase the history of why you developed it because you refuse to accept the immature or frightened past self that built that defense mechanism, well, the defense mechanism continues to fire. But now it lacks context.
You feel the anxiety, but it's totally opaque to you.
Yes, you feel the friction in your cognitive system, but it's transparent. You have to keep the differences between your past and present observable in order to decode your own reflexes today.
Which is huge. And if we take this concept of the multi-phase self and apply it externally, It fundamentally changes how we view relationships, right?
No, entirely.
We often run into an old friend from high school or college, and we walk away feeling this heavy disappointment, saying they aren't the person they used to be. We sort of frame their change as a broken relationship.
Because we view the relationship as a contract based on consistency.
Right.
But a reunion with someone you haven't seen in a decade is actually a multi-phase encounter.
Mhm.
It is two continuously generating selves colliding. You aren't the single static state they remember, and they aren't the single state you remember.
That's such a better way to look at it.
If you demand they perform the identity you have frozen in your mind, you aren't interacting with them. You're interacting with a ghost.
Man, yeah. Which brings us to a massive technological complication. What happens when we externalize our memory?
Ah, AI.
Yeah, we are increasingly letting algorithms remember our pasts for us. How does the multi-phase self survive a digital footprint that never forgets anything we've ever, clicked, bought, or searched?
This is where reflective humanism introduces the concept of core fields in relation to artificial intelligence. A core field isn't just a database of your past actions, it is an algorithmic environment that surrounds you.
Okay.
When you interact with a sophisticated AI over a long period, it maps your cognitive footprint. It remembers your past prompts, the specific vocabulary you prefer, the underlying anxieties in your questions. It effectively summons your past self into the present dialogue.
Which, creates a frictionless experience in one sense. You don't have to explain your context every time you open the app. It already knows how you think.
It removes the friction of reintroduction, sure, but it introduces a profound constraint. If the AI uses this historical data to define you, if its underlying architecture assumes you are this specific kind of person, you have always preferred this political slant, you always buy this type of product, then memory turns into a cage.
It's defining you by your past.
It forces consistency onto a biological being that requires continuity to survive.
So if an AI or even a friend honestly treats you based only on a past snapshot, it's like trapping a living trajectory in amber.
Yeah.
Recommendation algorithms are essentially feedback loops of our past selves.
Yes, perfectly stated.
If an algorithm only feeds you content based on what the you of 6 months ago was curious about, it doesn't allow for the possibility that you might want to abandon that interest entirely.
Yeah.
We need a space that allows for the gradient of change, not a fixed evaluation.
Exactly. The technical mechanics of how an AI interprets human data must shift. An AI should function as an atmospheric field, or like a health scan, that observes the gradient of your change, rather than logging a static average of your data points.
Let's break down that word for a second. Gradient. In math, a gradient measures the rate and direction of change. So how does an algorithm observe a gradient of human identity?
Instead of the algorithm concluding, this user likes topic X, it should calculate, this user's engagement with topic X is decelerating, while their vocabulary suggests a growing curiosity about topic Y.
So it's looking at the movement.
Yes, it maps the vector of your transformation. It recognizes your trajectory without forcing a fixed evaluation based on your historical data. A healthy technological environment provides a space that allows you to transition between phases, rather than boxing you into the person you were last year.
I love that. And if this framework applies to our internal cognition, to our friendships, and to our tech, it scales up to the macro level as well, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The grandest scale.
Civilizations operate on the exact same structure of continuity versus consistency. Every major society has a deeply contradictory history.
Because a civilization is essentially a macro version of the multi-phase self. You see nations preaching universal freedom while simultaneously restricting it through systemic laws.
Right.
You see institutions built on the rhetoric of equality that actively maintain exclusion based on class or origin.
And just like the individual who is deeply embarrassed by their immature or destructive past, a civilization will often try to compress or rewrite its own history.
To make it look clean.
Yeah, it builds monuments and writes textbooks to tell a neat, unified, consistent story about its founding principles. It tries to amputate the ugly phases.
And when a society attempts to erase the history of its own contradictions to appear purely consistent, it loses the ability to diagnose its current dysfunctions. The contradictory history becomes unobservable in the official narrative, but the structural friction remains.
It's like a society's muscle memory. If you bulldoze the history of a specific systemic inequality, you won't understand why certain communities react with intense sensitivity to modern legislation.
You don't know why it has a limp.
Exactly. You won't understand the reflex. The society walks with the limp, but because the history was erased, Nobody knows where the injury came from. The society is experiencing transparent pain on a macro scale.
Which is why an open civilization must operate like a healthy individual self. It must keep its contradictory histories highly accessible and observable.
It has to look at its own hypocrisies.
Yes, its hypocrisies, its massive shifts in policy, and its historical failures not as anomalies to be deleted from the record, but as the actual documented trajectory of its generation. Maintaining the visibility of those past phases is the only way a society can truly understand the architecture of its present systems.
Man, that really brings it all full circle. Protecting your identity, whether you're an individual, a friendship, or a whole civilization, doesn't mean refusing to change.
Not at all.
And it certainly doesn't mean you have to applaud or justify everything you did in the past.
Yeah.
It simply means not erasing the past, not being immobilized by it.
Yeah.
It means leaving the pathway of your changes completely visible so you can actually understand the cognitive and emotional mechanics of how you arrived at exactly where you are today.
And that visibility forces us to consider a rather provocative reality regarding time, which the source material leaves us with.
Oh, what's that?
If the present you and the future you are going to be fundamentally different entities operating with different values, entirely different circumstances, and desires you currently cannot even fathom, to what extent can the present you actually take responsibility for the future you?
Wow. That is a staggering question to sit with as you navigate your own multi-phase self. Your future self is, in a way, a stranger you are currently building a life for. Thanks for joining us to explore the mechanics of who we are across time, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.